Hello again, and I hope you are doing well. So, you know my name, Francisca Anene, and I'm the one taking you legal drafting and conveyancing. This is another subject on the course. And of course, I know that as you take part one topic after the other, you're getting better, you are becoming excellent drafters, you are mastering the art of legal writing, and you are becoming more skillful. So let's see what today's topic has for us to learn, and let's make progress. Progress is going to be on both ends. You will need to listen, take notes, pay attention, answer the questions, take part in all the activities, and I will also do the teaching and I will answer whatever questions you have during an online class. So let's not waste time. Let's just go. Okay. So this is our third lesson, and our topic for this lesson is legislative. By the end of the lesson, you should be able to explain what we mean by legislative drafting and what it entails, the different uses of the different components of a bill, and you should be able to differentiate between the drafting process and the legislative process. Now, legislative drafting is simply the process of drafting a bill. A bill is a draft law, which is usually presented to the legislature for them to pass it into law and then pass it to either the president or the governor or local government, depending on the status of the particular law, for assent. So a federal law is an act, a state law is a law, and a local government law or if a local government legislation is a bylaw. Now, it's important for you to differentiate between the drafting process and the legislative process because they are not the same. The drafting process is carried out by the draftsman, and he starts at the point at which the draftsman receives the instruction from whoever is sponsoring the bill until he completes the drafting of the bill and hands it over to the sponsor. And the main knowledge that is required or skill is skill in legislative drafting. Legislative process, on the other hand, is carried out by the legislature. It actually commences when the drafting process ends. That is when the sponsor now presents it before the floor of the legislature, and it entails different stages. In Nigeria, you have the first reading, second reading, committee stage, and then if they pass it into law, they will now take it to the president or whoever, the governor, local government chairman, for assent. And what is required primarily is knowledge of constitutional law. So let's look at what a bill is. Now, remember we said that legislative drafting is the drafting of a bill, right? A bill is not a law. What makes a bill a law is the presidential assent or the governor or local government chairman's assent. So without that assent, it remains a bill. It is not binding, and it is just an expression of intention by the legislature until assent is granted. The authorities that have the power to draft to legislate to go through the legislative process in Nigeria are of course the legislature, and you have two different arms. You have the National Assembly for federal, and you have the state houses of assembly. Now, this is a constitutional issue. It is supported by section 1 and 6 of the Constitution. There are different um, parts of the constitution that these different legislative houses can legislate on. So all matters on the exclusive list are legislated on only by the National Assembly. And then for concurrent, both national and state houses may legislate. But if there's an inconsistency between an act and a law on the same matter, the law will be void to the extent of the inconsistency. Now to an activity. I want you to compare and contrast between the drafting process and the legislative process. Let's see how well you remember what we have talked about. I'll give some time for you to just think about it. Now, drafting, as we said, is a skill, is an art, it is serious business. So it should not be done in a haphazard fashion, but should be logically done and put in a progressive manner. And there are five major stages. You have receiving instruction, analysis, design, composition, and so the first stage, of course, is receiving instruction, and it includes an understanding of the instruction given. So, as a legislative drafter, the drafter will need to listen. Listening is a skill. Ask questions when necessary. And then, of course, he has to consider things like what the background of the bill is. Why do you want that bill? What is the object? What is the bill or the law hoping to achieve? How can it be achieved? And any challenges that, may be associated with that process. The second stage is analysis. At this point, the drafter is analyzing the instructions that he has received, and he considers three major things. He considers whether there are existing laws that cover what the sponsor of the bill wants, in which case there's really no need to draft a fresh bill. Maybe what just needs to happen is to amend an existing law. He considers potential danger areas, what may be issues that will affect the success of both the legislative process and the enforcement process, and then it considers how practicable that bill will be considering the local circumstance. This is why we talk about the need to have skill in sociology and psychology and all of that. And stage. At this point, the design stage is the third stage, where the drafter now structures the information, to try and see how it will be. So he arranges the bill in chronological fashion, puts what is first, at the top and what should come last, arranges them to look, to get a feel of how it should look when it is drafted. He can at this point decide whether he should break the law into parts. So, for instance, if you look at Kama 2020 has 7 parts, or he can just decide that okay, there's no need to break it into parts. Everything is connected, so let's do it in one bill. The whole point of the design stage is for ease of reference, for the presentation to be clear and ease of comprehension, not just by a legal expert, but by the common man. And then he goes on to the composition stage where he begins to draft, to write. At this point now, in present day, we don't use, of course, colloquial language or archaic language. So he makes the bill in his drafting, uses plain English, makes it as readable and easy to understand as possible. He makes it precise. He makes use of appropriate precedents and dictionaries and all of that. But in using precedents, it's very important that you do not reinvent the wheel. Okay, if a precedent is there that covers your issue, then use it, of course, but make sure that you consider local circumstances, so you don't just copy and paste and then your bill does not make sense because you are reflecting a foreign issue that is alien to us. The final stage, the scrutiny stage. At this stage, proofreading, editing, and correction of mistakes is done, whether spelling, whether punctuation, whether words that lack clarity are redrafted and all of that. It is advisable that the drafter considers using an external editor or a trusted colleague to look at the bill with fresh eyes. However, whoever is chosen must be trusted because of confidentiality issues. Okay, let's talk about the components of a bill. There are many. You will not, I must point out at this point that you may not find all of them in a single bill. And so there are some you will find and some you will not find. It really depends on the style. Of course, there are some that are compulsory, but others may not be, depending on the law that is being drafted. First thing is your long title. It is usually long. It indicates the scope and purpose of the law, and then it's descriptive, and then usually it ends with the phrase "and for connected purpose," or you could say "and for purposes connected therewith." That's how you can identify the long title. It's not easy to remember, as the short title is. We'll talk about that later. Now to the preamble. These days we don't really use preambles, okay, and it is anyway not regarded as part of legislation, but you still find them in constitutions, treaties, and all of that. You have the establishment clause. This is not always compulsory. It is only used if the law or the bill wishes to establish a statutory body. So if there's no statutory body being established, then you will not find an establishing clause in the title. The short title is compulsory. It is deemed to be part of the legislation, right? And it is the statutory nickname. Now, remember I mentioned the long title as long and difficult to remember. The short title is that catchy, phrase that anyone can refer to the law as. So, for instance, the short title of CAMA is the Companies and Allied Matters Act. Simple. The long title will have an act for establishing the Corporate Affairs Commission and for incorporation and all of that. It can be quite long. Okay. Then going on, you have the application clause, which is not always compulsory. It's only used where the particular law does not apply to everyone. So the application clause states clearly who it is applicable to. So for instance, if Sharia law, right, is only applicable to Muslims in that a particular state, it will be stated, there will be an application section. Duration is also not always there. Depends on whether the legislation is meant to come to an end at a particular time. The presumption is that legislation is perpetual except it is repealed or amended. So if it is not meant to be perpetual, then there has to be a duration clause. Savings clause is to preserve existing laws that ordinarily will be repealed by the bill that is being drafted, if not expressly saved. Have the repeal clause. The repeal clause is used to bring the life of another law to an end. So where it is intended that a new law brings another law to an end, it must be expressly stated. So usually you will see the so and so act is hereby repealed and all of that. So that shows that that other law has been taken over by this law. So one law superseded by this law and therefore has come to an end. And then you have the schedule. The schedule is regarded as part of the legislation, even though it comes after all the parts, right? It is used to move technical matters and details from the main legislation for clarity. And the last part we'll talk about is the explanatory memorandum. It is not deemed to be part of the legislation, but is just used to explain the legislation in simple form. Okay, to our second activity, and I'd like you to mention 5 components of a bill and the uses of the components that you have mentioned. Time to think about it. Right. So at the end of this lesson, we have learned about what legislative drafting entails. We have talked about the different stages of legislative drafting, the difference between the drafting process and the legislative process, and then we have also mentioned the components of a bill and their uses. You may download this video and watch it again and again if to deepen your understanding. However, if you have any questions, please post it on the forum and then we will answer and try to make things clearer for you. So until we meet at our next class, I want to thank you for taking time to watch this video, and I encourage you to take notes and watch again and again until you are sure you understand clearly. Okay, so I'll see you at the next class.